Hello everyone, it's DJ here at Brainstorm Brewery, and I am here alone this time. No Jason, no Corbin, especially not Corbin, but I am here to talk to you about Commander, which I know it's normally Jason's thing, but I am here to give you some insight as to a hot new tribe that a lot of people are playing in Commander right now, and that is rogues. Thanks to Zendikar Rising, there are a lot of new aspiring rogue players, a lot of cloak and dagger initiates who want to pick up a rogue tribal deck, whether it's Sereth San, whether it's Anawan, whether it's Gwendolyn Decortzi, something like that. The Grixis one from Legends. Whatever it is, I have been playing Sygg River Cutthroat Tribal Rogues for probably about 5 years now. There's about a year or so where I took the deck apart, and then I missed it sorely and rebuilt it about last year before all the new rogue hype came along. And so I am here to do a deck tech on my current Sygg River Cutthroat list. It's something that some of the Brainstorm Brewery listeners have asked for. Some people on Twitter have DM'd me about it. They wanted to see my list and what I was running, which new rogues from Zendikar Rising I was going to play, which ones I was a little less excited about. And so that is what we are here to do today. If you are a $20 patron supporter at patreon.com/brainstormbrewery, you can message me and say, hey, DJ, I like your Selenia deck. I want to know why that works, and I want to know how that ticks. Or, hey, Corbin, I want to be a mean person to my friend group. Give me the dank tips on your Azami deck. If you are a $20 patron at patreon.com/BSB, you can do that. We will do one of these fancy little deck techs with you. We will go on to a video, describe all the cards we're running, describe some cuts and changes we can make to your deck to make it run a little smoother, or to just adapt it to your play group and make it so it's a lot more 75% friendly. So if that's something you're interested in, head on over. Thank you for all the support. Thank you for all of our patrons and all of everybody who just, even if you hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, all the YouTube algorithm stuff. So now that is out of the way, let's talk about rogues. What are they as a tribe and commander? How do they differ from a regular archetype sort of tribal decks like slivers, something like vampires, something that it's a little more common. Rogues are roguish in their nature and that they are off the beaten path, at least until Zendikar Rising. So why is that? And why am I running the commander I'm running? Why am I running Sygg over Sereth San? Why am I playing the cards I'm playing? Well, let's talk about that. So my commander deck is what I would describe as a tempo deck. For those of you who play competitive standard, for those of you who have experience in other card games, a tempo deck is going to play similarly to an aggro deck, but it is going to give up resources not to accelerate its own game plan to a very quick end. So I'm not like running burn spells. I'm not just trying to end the game out of some sort of non-combat damage. I'm sacrificing that non-combat reach in favor of the ability to throw off my opponent's game plan. And that's what I mean by tempo. I'm buying time. So tempo decks, some examples of tempo decks from standard decks of past have been Delver of Secrets is a very powerful tempo deck where you would land the turn 1 Delver, you'd flip it, you'd have one or two very cheap, powerful, evasive threats, and you would ride those threats to victory. You would gain advantages in combat damage, you'd press through for damage, and then you would use your resources to buy time. You wouldn't gain card advantage, but you would run things like Vapor Snag. You would run things like cheap, efficient counter spells that can stop your opponent in the early game, and then you just try to end the game before they get their huge, powerful effects off. You don't want to let the game get to a point where your opponent is just playing some giant game-ending threat or resolving a wrath against you, because then the game turns out pretty poorly. So what I mean by that in Commander, and if you have tried to build this sort of deck in Commander, and you might have thought it didn't work because, well, you're trying to gun down 120 points of life instead of 40. Like, you generally have 3 opponents, you generally have 3 other people at 40 life, and you're trying to attack all of these people, which does seem like a tall order at first, especially when you're running a bunch of cheap creatures and you can only counter so many threats. Well, one of the biggest reasons that this deck works is because you have such a large access to card draw. Card draw is very important in Commander. Everybody plays Rhystic Study. Everybody plays effects like Return to the Wild Speaker or just big swingy Rishkar's Expertise style card draw. But Sygg is a deck that runs card draw in spades, even compared to most other blue decks. Our commander, Sygg River Cutthroat, at the beginning of each end step, if any opponent has lost 3 or more life this turn, you draw a card. So if somebody fetches and shocks, I'll draw a card at the end of the turn. If somebody loses their mana crypt flip, I'm going to draw a card at the end of the turn. And Sygg comes down on turn 2, and he starts attacking. And you're reducing your opponent's life totals very early on. You're taking advantage of the fact that people in Commander are generally willing to give up those first few turns to try and accelerate their own game plan with things like mana rocks, with things like their own card draw spells, things like playing their commander who might not generally want to block or be able to block because if you're looking at the creature list here, we have almost every one of our creatures is very evasive. Whether that's complete unblockability, like with something like Tetsuo or Ghostly Pilfer, whether that's flying with Brazen Borrower or Marsh Flitter, or Rankle or Stink Drinker Bandit getting through extra damage on those unblocked attacks, most of our creatures, even things like Shadow with Lunar Ilkor, we're getting through and ignoring blockers and hitting our opponent, and then we're triggering things like Prowl, we're triggering things like Sygg, we're getting damage in, and we're using that damage to snowball our own game plan. Things like Notorious Throng, which makes a bunch of extra fairies, then gives me another attack step. We're just trying to snowball our own game plan and come out of the gates very early. And you'll see in the list that I have a lot of 2-mana creatures in this deck, and those 2-mana creatures, we want to play them early, we want to generate value by attacking, and then we want to continue and grow those creatures without letting our opponents slow us down. So we're expecting to run into things like Austere Command, like Wrath of God, like Cyclonic Rift, like Damnation, like Toxic Deluge. We're expecting to run into those, and that's where all of our counterspells come in. I know that there are some playgroups that generally don't like counterspells. There are some playgroups that might think that counter magic is averse to what Commander is doing and letting everyone have fun. But, I mean, we're trying to play a very small creature-focused aggro deck here, and we're using these counterspells to make it so our opponent doesn't get to that turn where they get to blink Deadeye Navigator a bunch of times, or go off with Tatsiova and gain 1,000,000 life and play 1,000,000 lands. So we're going to be using a lot of counterspells like Undermine, like Cryptic Command, even things like Force of Will and Commandeer is a big one. So if you go to the EDH rec page for Sygg River Cutthroat, and you can see how my list differs from these lists. You can pull my list from MTG Goldfish. And you might see that not a lot of other lists are running Commandeer, and I don't know why. This is a very, very powerful spell that can stop one-sided Wraths. It can stop your opponents from playing huge non-combat swings like Cyclonic Rift or Overwhelming Forces, or just things that are going to ruin your day. Even equipment like Sword of Feast and Famine you can take ramp spells, you can take things like Rishkar's Expertise and use them on your own game plan without paying a single mana. And, I mean, the card exile effect is generally negligible because we have so much card draw. We have just so many ways to put extra cards into our hands and even just discard to hand size. And that's why we're excluding things like Reliquary Tower too, because having too many cards in our hand we're just always drawing. We'll always be up on our hand size. So let's talk about rogues from Zendikar Rising specifically. Which ones am I playing and which ones am I excluding? There's 5 specific creatures that I am playing from Zendikar Rising that I really feel fit this deck's game plan. They slot into existing options for the deck and I would consider them upgrades. One of the biggest ones is Thieving Skydiver. We talked about this card a lot in the podcast. It's very obviously powerful. I don't need to talk too much about how this card just is very, very strong for the mana you're playing and the abilities you're getting. You're taking Mana Crypts, you're taking Soul Rings, you're taking Signets, you're taking Sword of Feast and Famines, you're taking Skull Clamps, you're just taking all these artifacts to your opponent. You don't even have to give them up at the end of the turn or when Thieving Skydiver dies. You get to keep that artifact forever. That's very powerful. I've been playing Master Thief for a very long time, which is a sower of temptation for artifacts that not a lot of people know about. But I've been playing that card, and Thieving Skydiver is a strict upgrade. I'm happy to play both. Anawan the Ruin Thief is another one. Some people might be playing this as their commander because it is the default commander from the Zendikar Rising Rogues Precon. I feel like this slots better into the 99 just because of what I was talking about earlier. Sygg comes down very early. He starts making your opponent lose life. You get that 2-drop Sygg, you get that 3-drop other rogue, and then you start attacking and you generally start drawing cards much sooner than Anawan would come out. So Anawan's, it's a solid card. I'm happy to play it in the deck, but I'd rather play it when I already have a decent board of rogues and I'm antheming up an entire board and just attacking people right off the bat. So Sygg makes the cut as the commander, Anawan makes the cut in the 99. And that's similar to how I feel about Zareth San, which was one of the first cards previewed from Zendikar Rising. He is the ninjutsu rogue, if you want to call him that, but you can't ninjutsu him from the command zone like you can Yuriko. You can only ninjutsu him from your hand. when an unblocked rogue attacks, and that's why we're playing him in the 99. So we can have him on our hand easier. We can search for him via a number of effects, whether that's Disciple of Deceit, which is a very underplayed card that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, because you might be wondering what that card even does or how it works in the deck, because Inspired was a mechanic in Journey to Nowhere. Or in Journey to Nyx. Journey to Nyx was the Theros set. But Inspired was a mechanic there, and it actually works out really well in this deck, and I've loved this mechanic a lot. So Disciple of Deceit, when it untaps, you discard any non-land card in your hand, and you can tutor for something of the same CMC. So you can turn your Disciple of Deceit, or you can turn your Fairy Vandal, or you can turn your Onus Blackguard into a Cyclonic Rift. You can turn your Notion Thief into a Cryptic Command. You can transmute any card in your hand for any other card with the same CMC in your deck, and that is very powerful. The downside, of course, is that you have to untap with this card, but we have a lot of ways to buff our rogues and make him attack. And when he attacks, he's going to be tapped, and then he's going to untap. So we're going to give him unblockability with things like Tetsuko. We're going to make him unblockable and get him in there. We're going to give our creatures just the ability to attack with things like Anawan, and with things like Stink Drinker Bandit, and things like just stealing our opponent's creatures and attacking. And so Smuggler's Copter is another very good way to enable this. I like playing Smuggler's Copter on turn 2 a lot, then turn 3 I'll play Sygg, and then I'll crew the Copter, attack somebody for 3, loot with the Copter, and then draw another card from Sygg at the end of the turn. And Disciple of Deceit can crew a Smuggler's Copter. Anyway, back to Zendikar Rising cards. Soaring Sky Thief is the other really, really powerful card from Zendikar Rising that I like. Very stat efficient, obviously. You're only paying 2 mana for 1/3 Flash Flyer, and then it lords your rogues up, like I was talking about earlier. We're going to get in for more damage, and then the milling is ancillary. It's not super relevant, but it's nice to trigger some other effects, or maybe get rid of your opponent's cards before you Bazooka Bog them. And another card from Zendikar Rising that I just actually saw about today, I didn't even see this card before I started recording this video, was Enigma Thief. It is a Commander 2020 exclusive from that Anawan deck we talked about earlier. It is a 7 mana 5/5 flyer, but it has Prowl for 4, so we're going to play it for 4 every time. I've never cast Knowledge Exploitation for 7, and I'm not going to play this for 7. But when it enters the battlefield, you can bounce 1 non-land permanent each of your opponent's control. So and this is another very powerful tempo card, right? Like we're playing this on turn 4 or even turn 3 if we have Frog Tosser Banner or a Dimir Signet or some other sneaky way to get in damage and ramp. And this is going to be a 5/5 flyer that comes out very early for very low mana cost, and it's going to be one of those cards that lets us hold up Undermine or Cryptic Command or Cyclonic Rift or just regular old Counterspell or Countersquall. And so we're attacking with this card, and then when their opponents try to Wrath, we're going to say no, and then we're just going to untap, attack some more, Notorious Throng, and just end the game outright. So there's a couple cards in Zendikar Rising that I'm not playing, and you might wonder why. Well, the upgraded Vampire Nighthawk is one of them. Nighthawk Scavenger, I believe the card's name is. Nighthawk Scavenger. And so this is a card that comes very, very close to me. It's the same stats as Vampire Nighthawk. It can grow to be very, very high power. But I just couldn't find a really useful slot of something I wanted to get rid of. Daring Thief might be a close exit. Daring Thief has performed mediocre for me over the past while. But this deck generally doesn't need raw stats. It's looking for more ways to efficiently use its mana in terms of counter magic or flash creatures. Flash is a big mechanic in this deck where you're wanting to wait to do things until the last minute, and we don't need Vidalcan Orrery or Layla of Anticipation because a good chunk of our cards, our instants, already have flash. So Nighthawk Scavenger is a one that I wouldn't fault you for running, but I just don't see a place in my deck. That might change in the future. Merfolk Wind Robber is another really close one. It's the 1-drop uncommon that mills them when it hits them, but it has the added ability of just being a flexible 1-drop that can be tossed away for a card later on when it gets outscaled. And then most of the other uncommon rogues from this set we're not really playing. They're just basically limited fodder for the party mechanic. Glasspool Mimic is the other rare one that you might be wondering why isn't in this list. I try not to run any non-basic lands that come into play tapped. This deck wants to be able to use all of its mana every turn, and just you don't want to be stuck with a 4-drop in your hand when you have 3 lands and a tapped land. We don't have ramp spells outside of our mana rocks. We don't have ways to accelerate our own game plan mana-wise outside of like stealing Soul Rings with Dada Adele and Skyrobber. So Glasspool Mimic is I don't like the fact that it's a non-basic land that comes in tapped, and I really don't like the fact that you can't clone an opponent's creature with it. It feels like a snowbally card that doesn't do anything if you're not snowballing, so it only works when you're really far ahead. And I don't feel like the deck has a lot of room for slots like that. The lands I think are pretty basic. I mean, they're pretty standard, non-basic lands that you'd expect in a blue-black commander deck. Same with the enchantments, the artifacts. There's a lot of just very stapley stuff just because we're trying to support a cast of creatures that attack, like you're playing a bunch of 2-mana 3/1s and 4-mana 2/3s that have synergistic abilities, and we want to play very powerful spells to back those up. Things like Sword of Feast and Famine, things like Kindred Discovery to draw a ton of cards, things like Bitter Blossom to generate value after we get Wrath if we let one through. And I mean, we don't want to go cheap on spot removal either, so we're going for Go for the Throat. We're going for things like I played Hero's Downfall in this deck for a bit, and then that got cut for Murderous Rider, and then that got cut for one of the new rogues. But Murderous Rider's an option, even though it's not a rogue. So we're playing a lot of just very, very staple, like Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise. These are staples that you could cut for more flavor if you want to add to that. But overall, I'm just in favor of playing cards that are going to present their value immediately, regardless of synergy, because all of our creatures really, really need synergy. So we need powerful spells in the non-creature department to back that up. And of course, I mean, in the creature department, we've got some of the newer rogues that people look at the card and they say, wait, that's a rogue? Agent of Treachery is a big one. People have PTSD from this card in Standard. Rankle, Master of Pranks is a rogue. Brazen Borrower is a rogue. These are cards that were likely seeded into Throne of Eldraine, intended on being rogues to work with the Zendikar Rising rogues, and we get to take advantage of that, not in Standard, but in Commander. True Name Nemesis is also a rogue. It's going to be unblockable for one of the players at the table, and we're playing it like it was designed to be played. Tiny Bones is another new rogue that I think a lot of people just skimmed over as a discard commander. It made a lot of cards spike, like Necrogen Mists, but I saw it and I saw the word rogue on its creature type, so we're going to put that in here, and it's going to be another one of those cards that accelerates our own game plan while removing our opponent's options. So there's some powerful discard effects in here, like Ona's Blackguard, like Rankle, and we are going to have a sub-discard theme, but making your opponent discard cards is not the primary objective of this deck, but we don't lose much by adding those specific cards in to help that game plan and move things along. Oh, there's a couple other exclusions in here that you might be wondering about that aren't just rogues, but on principle, I avoid playing Arcane Signet and Fierce Guardianship just because I'm not a huge fan of the design of those cards. Fierce Guardianship and Arcane Signet are a little too 2020 design for me to enjoy in this deck, so those are obvious slots that if you want to power the deck up to a specific end game goal, you can do that, but I generally avoided. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to this deck tech or watching it if you saw it on YouTube. My name is DJ Johnson, and I am Rose of Thorns on Twitter. You can find me at Most Magic Fest buying cards when those come back. And I do a podcast every Friday. It's called Brainstorm Brewery. If by some miracle you found this without knowing about the podcast. But yeah, hit me up on Twitter at Rose of Thorns. The second O is a 0. And thank you so much for watching. Let us know if you want to see more of these deck techs. Patreon.com/BSB. We're out.